So I've been sitting here measuring the distance to the exits with my eyes, wondering which one I would use, trying to gauge the relative weight of a chair and how far I could throw it. Knowing that I have two of my children here at the synagogue, could I get to them before harm got to them? It's uncomfortable. It's not unfamiliar. No more than 36 hours after our friend Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker escaped an armed terrorist with two members of his congregation from a sanctuary very much like this, I got a call from CBC News. They asked if I could do a TV interview via Zoom. They wanted to get my reaction to the news. I wasn't surprised by the call. In fact, I had been hoping for it. I wanted to talk about Texas. I wanted to talk about my heroic colleague and our communal trauma of having 3 attacks with guns on Jews in synagogues while we were at prayer in less than 5 years. Far more if you count street violence and vandalism. And so the reporter came on the phone. They do a pre-interview before you do the video interview, and asked her first question. What did I think of the news that Anne Frank and her family were turned in by a fellow Jew, as had been reported in a new book out that week? Anne Frank? Anne Frank? You want to talk about Anne Frank? Why do we need to talk about anti-Semitism that happened 70 years ago in Europe when we can talk about it when it happened less than 2 days ago in Texas? So many thoughts in my head. Too many thoughts. The first was the title of Dara Horn's award-winning book, People Love Dead Jews. Of course, the CBC wants to talk about Anne Frank. Anne and almost her entire family died. People love talking about dead Jews. Horn, whose book by that title just won the National Jewish Book Award, has been writing essays about Jews and the Jewish community for decades. The title of her book comes from her troubling realization that what all of these assignments had in common was that she was never asked to write about Jews that were living, only about the dead ones. In her book, Horn explores the not-so-shocking attacks on the American Jewish community in recent years, to which we can now add Colleyville, Texas, to that list. She reveals the subtler dehumanization built into public piety that surrounds the Jewish past, from which this Anne Frank question clearly derives. Horn's main insight is that much of the way we've developed to remember and narrate Jewish history is, at its best, self-deception. The 12 essays in her brilliant book explore how the different ways we commemorate Jewish tragedy, how we write about the Holocaust, how the media presents anti-Semitic events, how we establish museums to honor Jewish heritage, how we read literature with Jewish pragnosticists, I can barely spell it, I can hardly say it, and even how we praise the righteous among the nations, those non-Jews who saved Jews during the war. All of those things are distractions from the main issue, which is, of course, specifically the death of Jews. Of course they want to talk about Anne Frank. The Jews in Texas miraculously survived. Where is the story in that? The other reason I hazard to guess is that the revelation that it was a fellow Jew who turned in Frank and the other families in hiding to save his own family from the gas chamber thus absolves non-Jews and the non-Jewish world of accountability for the murder of this bright-eyed Jewish teenage girl who inspired the world with her diary and perhaps in its most famous and most quoted sentence wrote, "I still believe in spite of everything that people are truly good at heart." Considering how things ended for Anne, we find it astonishing and astounding that she still believed in people's essential goodness. But here is Horn's straightforward response to that quote. It is far more gratifying to believe that an innocent dead girl has offered us grace than to recognize the obvious. Frank wrote about people being truly good at heart before meeting people who weren't. 3 weeks after writing those words, she met people who weren't. The ways we remember are inextricable from the way we relate to what is happening today. Horn claims that setting the Holocaust as the bar for anti-Semitism means that anything short of the Holocaust is, well, not the Holocaust. The bar is rather high. According to Horn, this might explain the limited shelf life, so to speak, of current events like the gunning down of Jews in Pittsburgh, in San Diego, in New Jersey, and now in Texas. The hostage-taking in Texas. It shouldn't shock me, but still it does, that people don't want to talk about anti-Semitism. If it's not the Holocaust, it seems not to count. Now, I know that's a bold and audacious statement, but let me unpack it for you, because the events of these past few years require some unpacking. And let's start with Texas. You would think Jew hatred, which is what I prefer to call anti-Semitism, could not be a more obvious cause for pointing a gun at my colleague and his congregants. But in the very first press conference after the daring escape, FBI Special Agent in Charge Matthew DeSarno said, quoting, "The perpetrator was singularly focused on one issue, and it was not specifically related to the Jewish community. But we are continuing to work to find motive." Both the Associated Press and the BBC parroted this line, with the BBC tweeting, "Texas synagogue hostage standoff not related to Jewish community, FBI." They all later changed their story, but the first headline, the first inclination was to deny that an attack on Jews in a synagogue had anything with them being Jews in a synagogue. Brett Stevens in today's New York Times observes, "Instead, there was a focus on the assailant's supposed mental illness, along with additional reporting on the ever-increasing security consciousness of synagogues worldwide." Compare that to the mountain of reporting regarding the Asian hate that allegedly animated the killer in last year's attacks on Atlanta area massage parlors. Or compare it to the coverage of the unquestionably racist attack on Muslim worshipers at the mosque in Quebec City. For that matter, compare it to the naked Jew hatred that drove the killer in 2018 to synagogue and to massacre in Pittsburgh, which has been extensively reported and discussed. But then, again, to quote Dara Horn, people love dead Jews. Stevens asked, and I echo his question, how is it that Jews should be victimized twice? First, by being physically targeted for being Jewish, and second, by being begrudged the universal recognition that we are morally targeted as well. And how can it be? How can it be that in this era of heightened sensitivity to every kind of hatred, every kind of bias, every kind of stereotype, every ism and phobia, both conscious and unconscious, how can it be that there is so much caveating and so much outright denying when it comes to calling out bias aimed at Jews? The answer begins with the shape-shifting nature of anti-Semitism, Stevens explains, which some perpetrate and others participate in, and sometimes they do so unwittingly, and still a greater number just simply fail to recognize it for what it is, in part because each successive mutation, kind of like coronavirus, doesn't exactly resemble its predecessor. But it is more than that. At the core of anti-Semitism, at the core of Jew hatred from the days of blood libels and the protocols of the elders of Zion, is a conspiracy theory that Jews are all-powerful, that we control the banks, the media, and the mind of this Texas terrorist, the U.S. government. Such unhinged and corrosive conspiracy theories are demonstratively dangerous, as has been the history of our people. And again, Stevens observes, a moral conviction of our time is that power and the powerful are presumptively bad, while the powerless are presumptively good. And so the image of a British Muslim of Pakistani descent, not white, not privileged, not right-wing, in the binary narrative of the powerful versus the powerless, his naked anti-Semitism just doesn't compute. Powerless people are supposed to be victims, not murderous bigots. But if Jews are all powerful as the trope goes, then everyone is powerless in the face of them, and thus, on some deranged and absurd level, attacks on Jews are therefore justified as a rebellion against power, as a righting of some historical wrong as old as Shakespeare's Shylock, as noble as Robin Hood taking from the rich and giving to the poor. And it is why the Holocaust is the last acceptable reference to anti-Semitism, because Jews were so powerless in the face of the Nazi juggernaut, needing to be saved by white Christian soldiers who came nobly to their aid. It's also why anti-Semitism, masquerading as anti-Zionism, is acceptable, because Israel is a symbol of Jewish power, and power, even when necessary to defend your people and your land, is suspect at best, pure evil in the eyes of those less powerful. Understanding the root causes of Jew hatred is of absolutely no comfort to me and of no consolation. And the CBC reporter doesn't want to hear any of that anyway. She wants a nice soundbite. Isn't it comforting to know who turned in poor Anne Frank and her family after all these years? No, it's not. It points to the extreme and unimaginable circumstances that Jews were put in during that horrible time, where the only way to save their families was to turn in each other, to turn in other families, to turn in their neighbors. It was the Hunger Games in real life. Nor is it comforting to see police cars parked outside of synagogues on the high holy days, and guards at the synagogues like ours, doors every Shabbat. It's not comforting. Churches don't have them. Mosques don't have them. Only synagogues, only Jews have armed guards outside where they pray in this country, in North America. What would be comforting, what would be to live in a society where such things were not accepted as necessary for Jews to pray in a free society. What would be comforting would be the world to be in shock, would be the world to be in horror that Jews are attacked in a synagogue in North America. But that is not shocking. And if no one dies, apparently, it's hardly news. May Rabbi Citron Walker and his congregation be comforted by all of us. May their courage, their heroism embolden us. And may this not become normal. Shabbat Shalom.
Important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. Kol other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. Kol haolam kulo, kol haolam kulo, yesh etzar me'od. Kol haolam kulo, kol haolam kulo, yesh etzar me'od.
Reading before Aleinu.